I just want to clear some air on the issue of the hypocrisy. I want to expose the hypocrisy and the misunderstanding behind the Carnival festival and the Brazilian flowers. Uh, most of us will remember that the last Friday before Lent. By the way, Lent is is 40 days that Catholics and some other Christians spend or for fasting, just before Easter. The Brazilians normally gather up to make some form of a party. It's the biggest party, I think, in the world, or biggest festival in the world. Brazilian Carnival, the biggest festival in the world, and in Brazil, and it generates for Brazilian people around 1 billion US dollars. Just for that 1 week, they're able to generate something like a 1 billion US dollars. And what happened this year during the Carnival? Some Brazilians who do not even represent 1% of all the Brazilians who are in Brazil, they, since well you understand that this thing is very religious, they took it from that context and they reenacted what happened on the what happened when Jesus was crucified. All those incidences, they reenacted them, but in a more realistic way. And the way they reenacted them in such a way that they portray those people who were persecuting Jesus before crucifixion as demons or as devils. And now many people start coming up, hey, blah, 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 hey, blasphemy, blasphemy, blasphemy. Okay. That's the way people understand things, especially people who don't understand the background of some of the things. Yeah, it's okay to make conclusions for you to make conclusions based on what you know. Okay, the further you know, the more purified your conclusions will be, or not necessarily conclusions, because the more you know, the less you make conclusions, because you realize that actually there are more things which you do not know. You thought you knew, but you didn't know that you actually didn't know. You were naive, by the way. You thought you knew, but you didn't know. So you end up saying that if you end up having that spirit of investigating, of questioning, of always going further without making conclusions. Okay? Because now you realize that your knowledge is never enough to make conclusions. But unfortunately, some people have made conclusions on this thing, and some very serious conclusions, saying that it's blasphemous, blah 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 blah, whatever they said. And I want to expose the hypocrisy behind these people who were saying this, because later on, a few days after that, as always, Brazil started experiencing very serious floods. Of course, not the whole Brazil, but some parts of Brazil. They started experiencing very serious floods, started flooding in Brazil. And the same people started saying, this is what happens. This is what happens when you mock God. Okay? And I want to say, this is hypocritical. Why am I saying it's hypocritical? Because if you try to research, there are two sources here that I've used. The first one is this source is the climate change knowledge portal, which is a portal which is created by the World Bank for development practitioners and policymakers. Policymakers include these people, the governments, people who make legislation, okay, regarding this issue of climate changes and everything, climate change and everything. They released a document on Brazil and its climate state, and they exposed some of the things that maybe most of us were not aware of. And I would like to just summarize this thing, this thing in 4 points. The what? The information that they published in 4 points. They said, starting from what? 1900, that is 1900, to 2016, the country experienced 142 floods in total, which meant that in almost every, there are years maybe when Brazil experienced more than one flood, and serious floods, which are even more than these floods that they've just experienced now. And based on that statistics, Brazil is more prone to suffer from riverine flood, which resulted in an accumulated economic loss for over 6.1 billion during the time period of 115 years, that is from 1900 right up to 2016. In general, a flash flood tends to bring more damage to infrastructure and human lives. It has always happened in Brazil for over 100 years. It has happened. It's not happening just a few years ago. It's something which has been happening. So why didn't you portray the religious aspect of it by then? When the World Bank, through this climate change knowledge portal, published this information back in 2021, more than a year ago, why did the same people say, oh, hey, now God is punishing what? Is punishing Brazil? They kept quiet by then when the World Bank published this information on their site. And other than the point that they mentioned that this thing has been lasting for over 100 years, the other 3 points that they mentioned, they said during the same time period, there existed 18 droughts in Brazil, causing 20 total deaths and more than 11.2 billion US dollar total damages. In addition, almost 18 million people were affected by the events. It is evident that droughts or water scarcity are largely responsible for economic loss in Brazil, of course. In general, the country is rarely affected by tropical cyclone and extra tropical storms. We always see these things on the news about Brazil, so it's not something new to us. However, it has encountered a convective storms on a regular basis. By 2016, one extra tropical storm, one tropical cyclone, and 2 convective storms have occurred, resulting in 77 deaths and around 0.5 billion US dollar damages. And the last point here that they stress is that from 1900 to 2016, landslides have induced 1,700 deaths and affected more than 4.2 million people in total. This was not only released by the World Bank through climate change knowledge portal, but it was also released way back in 2018 by the USAID. USAID published a document on its site which is called Climate Risk Profile for Brazil, and they mentioned these same things. And by then, which is 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, no one has seemed to care about the religious aspect of this thing. Everyone looked at it from the scientific point of view. Why now, after this incident, suddenly remember, these floods did not even occur on the same day of the carnival. They started happening a few days later. If this was really coming from God, at least it could have happened at that particular time. so that there's a clear connection between the two. Say this happened and this followed, so probably this was caused by this. Probably, probably, not necessarily. Probably this was caused by this. So I just thought of creating a content and letting everyone try to broaden their broaden to broaden their understanding of this thing. Yeah. And stop looking at things at the face value and make conclusions, but rather have that inquiry mind. I hope everyone finds this helpful. Tada, sure. Please subscribe.